Hello and welcome to the Year 9 options information for history. My name is Mrs Cripps and hopefully I will answer all your questions about taking history GCSE. So if we start thinking what your child would study if they took history GCSE, there are 4 topics. They cover a real range of history, so hopefully there is something for everyone. Here's the course outline. You can hopefully see how the course progresses here. If you look, we've included Year 9 on here so you can see what your children are doing currently and how that would feed into the GCSE from the summer term. So the 4 topics that we study are on here. We're going to go through those now one by one. So medicine through time is the first topic that we study, and this will be started in the summer term of Year 9. You can see it goes right from medieval Britain up to the present day, and we look at different medical inventions, thinking particularly about treatments, cures and preventions, how this has changed over time, how different people have come up with different inventions, and it's divided into 4 distinct time periods to help the students work through all the information. At the end of each of these units is an end of unit assessment, so you can see how your children are doing, and that's true for all of the different topics that we study in history. So the first topic that I just showed you is a breadth study because it covers such a large period of time. The second topic that we do is much smaller. We look at the 30 years of Elizabeth's reign up to 1588 and the Armada. This again is divided to help the students with their knowledge, but also to provide us with some assessment points so you can see how your students are doing. Hopefully there is already something for everyone here because we've covered a big period of time with medicine, and lots of students have really enjoyed doing the Tudors earlier down the school, and this goes into a bit more depth about one of those Tudors, Elizabeth I. So you can see with our third topic we're becoming a little bit more modern, and we're looking at Weimar and Nazi Germany from the end of the First World War to the beginning of the Second World War. So it's that really interesting period after the First World War when everyone says never again, and the peace deal is supposed to assume that we're never going to go to war again, never have a war as bad as the First World War, and within 20 years we are at the Second World War. This is looking at it from a German perspective. So how Hitler managed to take power in Germany, how he took advantage of the economic problems, and then looking at once he had taken power, what life was like in Nazi Germany. And finally, our most modern topic, looking at the Cold War. So from the end of the Second World War up to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, how did the Cold War play out in Europe in particular, although obviously we're looking at America as well. So we're thinking of this again in 3 stages: the beginnings of the Cold War and how that all happened, from the Soviet Union and the USA being allies in the Second World War to becoming enemies. Then we look at some crises in the Cold War, and then we look at how the Cold War finished. So we're looking at a whole breadth of history, which is why I said at the beginning, hopefully there's something for everyone. The medicine unit starts in 1250. And our Cold War unit finishes in 1991, so hopefully this is something for everyone. Again, something for everyone we hope in the lessons that we teach in history. There's no getting away from all the writing that students have to do. It's a very written subject, but we try and make that as much fun as possible, and we also try and intersperse that with discussions, with debates, as well as practice exam questions and note writing to get all the information that they need. There's some project work, there's some group work, there's some presentations, so it won't all just be sitting in a classroom and writing, although that is something that students need to factor in if they're thinking about taking history. As I mentioned just now, there's a lot of writing in history, and that's because the students will sit 4 papers over 3 exams. Let me explain. The breakdown is below. So the first paper is all about medicine through time, and that's the first topic that we do. I mentioned to you the 4 units through time. There's also a separate section in this paper about medicine in the First World War, and that's linked to it with one of our trips, which I'll talk about in a moment. The second paper is divided into 2. So it's only 1 exam on one morning or one afternoon, but there are 2 separate parts to it. The first part is the Queen Elizabeth I section, and the second part is the Cold War section. And then thirdly, the final paper is the Weimar and Nazi Germany paper. You can see the breakdowns below, how all the marks are divided, and hopefully you can also see that this is an examined subject completely. For those of you who sat their own history GCSE or had older students doing this, there's no longer any coursework or controlled assessment. Everything is done by final exam. This is just to give you an idea of some of the common types of question that your children might be faced with if they choose history. So the first one on there is from the Cold War paper, explaining the consequences of the arms race. The second one is an explain why question, and these are common across the papers. Always 12-mark questions, always 3 Peel paragraphs in the answer. And then the last one is the long essay question. You'll see that that's worth 16 marks, but there are also 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar, so that's really important in these questions. These are always a statement, and students have to show they understand both sides of the argument. So for this one, they would argue that yes, Pasteur's germ theory was really important, but they might bring in another turning point in the 19th century, for example, the discovery of blood groups which allowed blood transfusion or things like that. These are the kinds of questions that students will get. The way we teach them is we talk about the type of way to answer the question. So they'll get exemplar answers, they'll get worked examples, and we scaffold how they learn to answer these questions so that by the time we get to the exam, they're really familiar with the types of questions that are going to come up and really familiar with how to answer each of the separate types of question. So I mentioned earlier the last topic in the medicine paper is about surgery and treatment in the First World War. And to that end, once we were allowed to travel again, we ran a trip in year 10 to Ypres, where there were 3 First World War battles, lots of different places to visit of interest where we can look and see on the ground where it happened, how those soldiers who were injured were treated. This is a day trip, really worthwhile if you can put up with the really early start and the very late finish. And then in year 11, again, once we're allowed to travel, this would normally take place in October half term, we visit Berlin. And Berlin has the advantage of doing 2 of our topics. So we can look at Weimar and Nazi Germany while we're there, but we can also look at a real flashpoint of the Cold War. This was where East and West met across Berlin with the Berlin Wall. So 2 different topics in one. It's a very packed 3-day trip. Unfortunately, we don't have a trip regarding Elizabethan England, but you know, until someone invents time travel, we'll just have to put up with these 2 trips. Both of them are really worthwhile and will enhance your child's learning if they're able to go on those trips, but of course no student will miss out by not attending them. So for your children now, they've got a big choice to make with your input about why they should or shouldn't pick history. For a lot of them, it will be a choice between history and geography. Some of them might want to do both, but it's really thinking about enjoyment. They're going to be spending 2 years doing this subject. It's going to be a lot of hard work. So first and foremost, are they enjoying their history? Which of those topics sounds interesting to them? Think about the least interesting topic. Are they going to be able to struggle through that when they're maybe not that interested in that section of history? But enjoyment is the most important thing. You can also think about transferable skills. So I've mentioned there's quite a lot of writing. So if your child is really good at English, that could enhance it. But also if they're not so good at English, this could really help because the structure and the writing in history will hopefully help them develop their vocabulary, develop their reading and writing skills and just general literacy skills, which will hopefully help them with their English GCSE. It's thinking about other skills as well. So we look at balanced arguments. I mentioned the 16-mark question where they've got to look at 2 sides of things, and that's a really common theme in all the topics that we look at. So it's thinking about what they would like, what they might not like so much in terms of the topics that we're doing, but also the transferable skills. It's a great subject for understanding what's going on now. We're living through a pandemic and we'll learn about a few of those when we do our medicine through time. But also the world that we live in today is very affected by the consequences of the Second World War and the Cold War. And so all of those things will help students to understand the world that they are currently living in. Last but not least, a history GCSE will not get you a particular job, but if you know, for example, that you've got ambitions to go to university and do law, history is a really good thing to do because that's a really positive A level to have, so having your GCSE would be a stepping stone for that as well. So it's something to really think about, to talk over with your history teacher, and please talk to them about that at parents' evening. Having talked about all the reasons to do history, there are several reasons why you shouldn't pick it. If there's nothing else that you want and you're just sticking that down, that's going to be a really hard slog for 2 years because it is quite a lot of hard work, as all GCSEs are. If your brother or sister did it and you think, oh well, I might as well do that, again, not a great idea if it's not something that you really enjoy. And if your best friend is doing it and you're hoping that you'll be in the same class as them, or you're hoping to get a certain teacher, again, that's a really silly way of choosing your options. We've got 8 members of staff teaching history GCSE, so the likelihood of getting the teacher that you want is quite small. All the teachers in history are fabulous, but don't pick the subject just because of one particular teacher. If you're really struggling, please talk to your history teacher about your options going forward and about how you will do and what you're enjoying. So I've spoken a lot about history. I'd like to now turn the floor over to 2 of my Year 11 students. I asked them why they picked history, and I haven't edited these in any way, shape or form. This is just their words. Dan really liked it because of the cross-curricular aspects that I mentioned before, and his favourite topic within the 4 that we've done is Nazi Germany and about Hitler's rise to power. Isabel has more enjoyed the medicine unit, so thinking about all the strange things that people used to believe and the treatments that they used to have and how that's affected and what we have today and what's going on. So 2 different aspects of what they've enjoyed from 2 Year 11 students. Obviously on a normal options evening, at the end of this talk, you get a chance to ask questions of us, and that can't happen. But I put this slide in because the most common question is, what can I do as a parent to help? And these are the 3 main things that I think would be really useful from your point of view, is to help students get organised. One of the big things is keeping their books together. So when they finish their medicine through time unit, for example, at some point in year 10, they won't again look at that book for another year. So it's keeping that somewhere safe at home, helping them to be really organised. I mentioned earlier that they have lots of end of topic tests. Testing them and helping them with flashcards and memory is a really useful way of helping them to make sure they've retained some of that information that they've learnt in class, and also keeping on top of them for homework is really useful. So making sure that they're turning the work in that they're supposed to be, they're revising when they're supposed to be revising, and generally the organisation. If you've got further questions, which I'm sure many of you have, please feel free to ask your child's history teacher at parents' evening, or you can email lcripps@fitzwymark.com, and I'm the assistant head of history, or lhewitt@fitzwymark.com, who's the head of department, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope to see your child in history lessons next year, or if not, to know that they've made a really strong decision to pick another subject. Thank you.